Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Endgame Podcast. I'm the host, Nathaniel Davis. Today, I am joined by Matthew Brookey, a friend of mine, known him since preschool. Pretty cool dude, knows a lot about cars. He's here to tell us about it. How you doing, Matt?
Doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Well, getting by as much as you can right now. So, if I remember right, a little bit last year, you told me that you got a steam engine or have had a steam engine for a bit.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was my grandpa's. He got that when he was 7 years old. It's a 1912 20-horse Advance. It's been in the family since 1955, and we just got it a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago after he passed away. We bought it at auction.
Okay. How does that work? So, like, obviously it's a steam engine and you're putting in the wood and all that. How much wood does it take to run one of those?
Well, to get the firebox filled, you need about a half a truckload of wood. It takes a lot of wood to keep that going, and it holds about 450 gallons in the boiler and about 250 in the water tanks that you got on the back of it.
Okay. And you probably have to keep a whole bunch of water nearby just to have it running, right?
Oh yeah, they eat water up pretty quickly.
How many 55-gallon drums would you say you have sitting around the thing?
Um, Usually if you're going to be working it for more than an hour, you're going to need at least 300 gallons of water.
Jeez. Jeez.
Yeah, and it really does depend on how hard you're working it, because the harder you're working it, the more water you're going to use.
Yeah, yeah. I just think it's crazy that they were able to fit, like, the technology at the time into that, to where it was basically one of the first tractors, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's actually really complicated for how old it is. It's got a lot of Most of it is just big gear driven stuff, but if you get into the internals of the actual engine, there's a lot of really small stuff that does all kinds of important stuff, and if you don't get that set right, it won't run worth a damn.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, it's so crazy that back then they were able to, like, think that, hey, this is a problem we might run into, and they were able to, like, anticipate those things with the technology they had at the time.
Yes, that's my opinion too. They're really advanced for how when they were built back in the teens and the 20s. Like, they were super complicated, like new cars today is basically what they were back then.
And, like, you think about it now, like, the cars, trucks, tractors, like, any vehicle, basically, all of them have the basic same engine and all that. It's about what, like, computers and stuff you can put in it now.
Yeah.
So, kind of touching on the newer vehicles, what's the biggest thing you just absolutely despise about newer vehicles?
Computer controlled everything. Electronic fuel injection, those are the two things I hate the most.
Yeah, because that really just takes away from what being a mechanic or something is. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Because basically, even in the 80s when they were starting to get into computer controlled stuff, back then a mechanic did actual work. Nowadays, a mechanic just plugs in a scanner and they figure out a code that's wrong. I mean, it really has taken away from the job, but I still love it and I still want to do it.
Yeah, because I mean, like, having dad work it, like, on the diesel trucks and all that, semis, they basically just plug something in and it tells them, what's going wrong with it, and that's how they diagnose the trucks. It's never like, let's take it out in the lot and we're gonna run it and do these different things to see, like, what it does.
Yeah, and that's how it used to be. You have to actually do actual diagnostic stuff and tests to see, okay, this is working, but something else isn't working. Like, it was a whole different thing. Now it's just a lot easier. A dummy can do the job now, really. Back then it was actual skilled labor, and now you just have to know how to read a computer screen, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, there's some skill to, like, being able to go in and, like, still, and you see this more with the people that have been around and, like, done it for a while, like, say how you've grew up doing it a certain way, you don't necessarily care for that technology. So one of my favorite things that's happened with you is like we were outside the school before we went into like a cross country team dinner, and you walked up to one car and you're just like, I bet it's that thing. And you popped the hood, you did the thing, and it was working fine right after that. Like I thought that was super cool, and like
Oh yeah, that was
there's
with yeah, I remember that was Jacob Meyer's car, and that mechanic guy was standing right next to us. We popped the hood and he started it up, and I told him exactly what it was. And the mechanic who was standing next to me, been doing it for 20 years, said it after I said it. I had it right away.
yeah, and I mean there's definitely like a skill to that you see with like the older guys and the people that have done it that way for so long, like you.
Yeah,
I don't know, do you think that we're ever going to get back to that point? Do you think if tech just absolutely falls through and like something happens, people will want to go back to that?
honestly, I don't think people know how to do it anymore. Like everything has been done computerly for like since we'll say the late 80s is when they started doing computers on cars and stuff. And the computer controlled stuff doesn't last. It really doesn't last. And you can go back to like an 80s Ford or an 80s Chevy or something. You will never have a problem with those if you take care of them. But you got these new cars that like my mom's Cadillac, every other month it's having some kind of computer issue or codes are throwing it and sensors are going bad. But that's just, they've made everything way more complicated than it really needs to be.
Yeah. And I mean, like looking at, we have an '07 Lucerne, and there's plenty of stuff in that. Like it's not even, it's 10 years old, and there's still a whole bunch of stuff that's so different from any of the other cars we've ever had. Like it's insane.
Oh yeah, that's completely different from your Astro van. That thing is ancient. That's got all kind. That's all manually controlled everything. You go to that newer car. That's all computer.
Yeah, because like that was the weird thing. Like we would be driving, and I guess it's just my age, because like you know us growing up, at least we're kind of familiar with like everything being more tech related. So when we would get in the thing, there's like a sensor in it. It'll beep at you when you're about to get close to something. Like it doesn't have the backup cam. But when we would get close to something, it would start beeping, and like mom and dad would like freak out because they just weren't used to having that tech there to like, I guess, rely on.
Yeah, and people do rely on that too much. Honestly, like the backup cameras and the forward cameras and stuff that they've got on new cars now. My a perfect example of that is my mom's car's got a backup camera, so she's backing into a parking spot, not is relying on the camera, but she can't see that outside the camera range that there's a car she's about to hit, and she hits a car in the parking lot. That actually happened. But like me and my ancient
Just out
Ford
your
that I
mom.
drive,
Just out your
yeah,
mom.
yeah, and like me with the old stuff that I drive, because I refuse to drive new cars, I can't stand them. I got to turn my head around and look out the back window, and I actually know where I am in proportion to the vehicles around me. In my opinion, that's safer than having a camera because you don't know where the camera angle stops and you can't see.
Yeah, because like if you're backing up like way too fast, and like sure there's a person there, and you're eventually gonna see them, but by the time you realize that there's some feet in your backup camera, you're gonna stop and have already hit them.
Yeah,
I don't know. Every time that I've at least been in one of the newer cars to like back it up or something, I'm not looking at the backup camera. Like,
no,
sure
no,
it's
me
okay.
either.
It's okay when you're getting down to like super like tight spaces, But like I'm not gonna sit there if I'm just trying to get into a parking space and you have all this real estate on both sides. Like it's kind of useless.
Yeah,
So, before we had all this tech and all that, what do you think your favorite old car is? I don't even want to say it old, just classic, I guess.
classic. Well, I mean, there's a lot. Um, I don't honestly. I've got a favorite from every brand. but I'll go with Ford
Hey,
because Ford's my favorite brand.
no,
I'd
you
say,
can tell all your favorites from each brand and line them up for us.
all right,
So
I'll do
give
that.
us each brand and then line them up. Obviously, you just said Ford will be your favorite, but still.
Yeah, so Ford's my favorite. I love the 70s F Series. After 74, the body style is just, I love it. I love all the curves, and they call them a dent side. I don't really understand that because they do look like they have a dent going down the entire side of it, just how they were made. But the engines in those things and the transmissions that they put in those are bulletproof. You cannot kill them. You get a 70s Ford, you can run it with water in it instead of oil, and it will still run. The bad thing about them is they do rust apart because they used terrible steel back then, and most of the engines that were in them have no power because of the energy crisis.
Yeah.
But overall, I think that's one of my favorite trucks would be that. And to the square body Chevy, it's a classic. I will always love those, even though I'm not even a Chevy guy. But they put some really good engines in those. 350s are decent. It's a good motor if you take care of it, in my opinion. But something like a 396 or a 454 is, those are good engines. I really like those. They got trashed on back when they were being made because for how big the engine was, they really didn't make any power because Chevy did stupid stuff with how they put their engines together and how they configured things. They made
Yeah.
them so they would have gas mileage, not so they would have power. Dodge, I can't really say that I really like anything from Dodge. I mean, first gen Cummins is kind of cool in my opinion. I like the body style. I'm not a fan of the Cummins. They sound like a rice burner, and they've got no power. I've driven several of them that are
I don't
quote
know. I
unquote.
don't know if we can say that on YouTube. We might get banned.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not a
Oh,
Cummins
I
guy.
don't care. I'm messing with you, man.
That's all right. But Ford, Chevy, and Dodge, they've all given their 2 cents to the automotive world. They all have their good things and they all have their bad things. Ford has made some crazy mistakes in the past. So is Chevy, so is Dodge. They all have their
Hey,
fault
but
point,
all
but
of them have made mistakes, but Ford was the only one that didn't get bailed out in a way.
exactly. That's,
So,
yeah, Ford is the only company that didn't get bailed out by the government.
see, I'm not super into it. I don't really have a preference anyway, you know. But like they know what they're doing business wise.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, honestly, all of them do because they're able to sell a truck for 70, 80 grand when you can buy a house for that much. It's insane.
Yeah. And the profit margins that they're making on these is insane. Let's say I have no idea what it actually costs to make a truck. Let's say it costs like 40 grand for them to actually manufacture the vehicle, and then they turn around and sell it for 40, not 40, sorry, like 80. They're making like double their profit margins, and everybody thinks they're getting like a hell of a deal on the car, but really the the company is making out like crazy on those.
Yeah, here. Let me see if I can find something. The average cost, or is that cost? Here, the average cost of a Ford F-150 is around 27,000, and I don't know when this is from, but it says 27,000, and then after profit margins and all that, the profit earned by Ford is 13,000.
Wow.
So either way, they're making a good bit.
Yeah, they're making decent money on that. That's why they've been in business for so long.
Yeah. Now, what do you think cars wise? Where's your views on cars?
Cars, Chevrolet would have to be a 64 through 69 Impala. That is one of my dream cars. I will own one of them someday. It will happen. I keep telling my dad that, and he just laughs at me every time. They're hard to find and they are expensive.
Yeah.
Ford would have to be, it would probably have to be a 64, 65 Mustang. I love those cars, and I'd really like to have one of those too. They're just, but they're, man, people are really proud of those. Even if you go find one that's completely trashed, that's got no engine, no transmission in it, they still want like 8 grand for it because it's a Mustang.
Yeah.
And Dodge, I like the Challengers and the Chargers from the 70s, but the engines that they put in those really weren't powerful at all, so they're not really fun to drive. I wouldn't really own one of those, but I like how they look.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's just something cool about being able to pull up in like a muscle car or sports car or something like that, you know?
Yeah, it's and the respect that you get when you, being like a 17-year-old kid, pulls up in the parking lot with a 60s car and you get out of it and it looks nice and you're not one of those fags that has a rice burner. I hate people like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I definitely would rather have something like that than like a newer car that you're building just for the speed and like the sound, I guess.
Yeah,
Because that's the thing. When you get down to a lot of those older cars sound way better than anything now, too.
yeah.
So, what do you think your favorite era of trucks are?
Mm. I'd say from the 80s up until the late 90s.
Still with Ford on that?
Yeah, still with Ford on that. Well, if we're going with Ford, I like everything from the 50s up to 1997. Everything after 1997, I can't stand. I can't, no, I just don't like it. They changed the body styles way up. They put really bad engines in those cars and trucks, and I just can't stand by them after that.
Gotcha. So, in your 50s to 97 range, what do you think is the best decade for that?
My opinion would be the mid 80s. So, like from 1984 on to 1989.
Yeah,
That's when Ford came out with the 6.9 IDI diesel. They came out with that combat Chevy coming out with their 6.2. And a lot of people don't like the 6.9s, but I personally love them. They're super clangy and they are what I think a diesel engine should be. They sound super cool. They don't really make that much power, but they've got a lot of torque. You can pull a house down with them if they're geared right. And the bodies that they had on those were just beautiful.
yeah. And then on top of that, like you would think that over time they would make different engines or realize that, hey, this is our best engine, we should probably put it, keep putting it in the newer trucks. What do you think the direction is when a company might not make the best engine but still put it in a newer model?
Honestly, I disagree with why they do that. So, back in 2003, Ford went away from their super famous Power Stroke 7.3 liter diesel. That was a great engine. They used that from 1988 all the way up until 2003. And they got rid of that and they introduced the 6.0 Power Stroke, which has so many problems. I don't even have enough time to tell you about them. But most of them were they had really bad oil coolers. The oil would overheat and crack the cylinder heads, and then the engine was trashed. And their EGR systems that recirculates the exhaust into the intake would clog up and destroy motors. And they used that engine for years, even though it was a complete piece of trash. They used it for, I think, 4 or 5 years. And then they came out with the 6.4 Power Stroke, which was even worse than the 6.0. And they used that for several years until Ford finally was done dealing with International, who made their engines at the time. And now Ford makes their own engine, which is the 6.7 Power Stroke, and that has been wildly successful. And there are no real issues with those that have been reported yet. They've only been out since 2011, but that's several years for an engine to run. And really, the only problems that they've had with them are with the exhaust treatment systems, but everybody's having that problem because they still haven't figured out how to do that yet.
Yeah, and like hearing my dad talk about like the semis and all that, how they have the I think it's the EGR coolers and all that where they're trying to
Yes.
recycle. I just don't understand that because I get that it's helping the environment to a degree, but until they put that on every car and like figure that out, it's not doing as much as they hope.
Yeah, really, an EGR just is not good on an engine. It destroys longevity. It's you're feeding the engine exhaust instead of air.
Yeah.
And the soot and stuff that you would get out of the exhaust is going into the intake, and it makes the engines just run terrible.
So you've kind of touched on the whole EGR bit and like what you liked in the different Fords and like what's been good in different trucks throughout it. So like say you were to build your perfect truck, what parts, what body style, what everything are you doing to it? What is your perfect truck?
Well, what I would really love to build is I'd take a mid 70s Ford and take out the engine and transmission that are in those, and I'd put a 7.3 IDI out of mid 80s diesel Ford, and those two together would be my favorite thing. That's my favorite of those two generations put together, and a lot of people trash on those because they don't really make that much power, but I just like how they sound, and I'd love to be able to drive one because you can't really find them anymore.
Yeah. And same with like those cars you can't exactly find anymore and just different parts and all like that. How hard do you think it would be to like get into that, like to refurbish just a truck in general or a car for that matter?
Well, there's a lot of aftermarket supporters nowadays for the classic cars and even like the 90s stuff. A lot of people make the parts for them, but if you get back to the older like 50s and 60s stuff, some of that is really, really hard to find parts for. And if you do find the parts, they're really expensive. But like the stuff that people usually build nowadays is like square body Chevys. There's parts for those all over the place and they're super cheap. Same thing with the 70s Fords and a lot of the later muscle cars, like the newer Mustangs, the Fox bodies and things like that.
Yeah, but how much do you think it would typically cost a person? Say they, they have the experience, they know what they're doing, but they have absolutely zero parts. They don't have the base of the car. How much do you think it's going to cost them just ground up?
Whew. Well, it really, I guess, depends on the vehicle, but probably anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. It really depends on what you do to it.
Yeah, and that's it's a pretty big investment just to get into that, and then even maintaining and all the different stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really having cars and things is not a cheap hobby at all.
Yeah, what's the most you would put into an older truck? What's our baseline here?
Well, I really want to get my truck redone because it was my grandpa's and it really doesn't look the greatest anymore. It's rusted and got dents, and I just wrecked it. And I have been talking to several body shops to see how much it would really cost to get the whole truck redone and repainted and all that. And it's around uh, anywhere from 5 to 8 grand. And I think about 7,000 would be the most I would want to put into something because you don't know what's going to happen. You could get it all redone and repainted and then wrap it around a telephone pole on the way home. You never really know. But I would never put like 20 or $30,000 into a car because it's really just not worth it at that point.
Yeah, and what's your opinion on buying new cars? Would you ever buy a new car?
No, I think the newest thing I will ever own is my 1996 Ford because I don't like new cars. I don't like how they look. I don't like how complicated they are and how I can't work on it myself. I have to take it to a dealer to get everything done. And I just don't like that. I like to be able to work on my own stuff.
Yeah, I mean we've kind of already touched on this a little bit earlier in the episode, just not liking the electronics and all that in these things. But when you get into like the older vehicles and all that, there's a certain amount of money that you really need to put at the things just to keep them going and like that backup fund for when you need to fix it. And sure, you can save money like fixing it yourself, but at the same time, is there a point where you'll say, hey, maybe it'll just be easier to get a new vehicle? Do you think that may ever cross your mind?
Well, yes, that has crossed my mind several times actually. A perfect example is last year when I worked in Inglewood and I was driving 60 or 70 miles every day to go to work and come back home and everything. My truck was starting to have problems, and I blew out a couple bearings, and just things kept going wrong and kept going wrong. And I had to keep putting money into it. And I was almost at a point where I was going to have to get something else if it broke again. I got lucky; nothing else broke. But it's there is a point where you have to quit throwing money at it.
Yeah, and I think I saw that most recently, like with my parents' car. I think it was a mid '90s, Malibu, but it just seemed like stuff kept on going wrong, or there was something that you could like drive it with, like the AC wouldn't work and all that, or something like that. It's the unnecessary stuff. But at the same time,
Yeah,
like it's part of the comfort of kind of having in the vehicle, and it's nice for it to work when you want it to. And
yeah,
it just felt like we were pushing it to a point. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Definitely get the most you can out of each car, because we turned 300,000 on the thing before we took it in. But
yeah,
still, there's a point. Like I know one family member has a truck that they've pushed 400 on, and I don't know. It's just there's there's only so much you can do to keep them running at that point.
yeah. And it really honestly depends on how well you've taken care of the car throughout its entire life. That's why I really don't like buying cars that have a ton of owners. If I can buy like a one owner or a two owner car that's got, let's say, 250,000 miles on it, but they took care of it, I'm fine with that. If I can buy something that's got like eight owners and it's got 30,000 miles, but you don't know if they took care of it or not, there's just really, it just depends on general maintenance, really. Because my truck is about to roll over to 350,000 miles, and it was religiously taken care of when my grandpa had it, and I've done the same thing to it. And as long as you keep taking care of them and replacing the consumable parts, you shouldn't really have any problems with them.
Yeah, and I know when I was younger, Dad had a truck and all that, and the only reason we had to get rid of it is because the body started rusting out. And really, if you can keep the like chassis and all that going with it, you know what I mean? If you can
Yeah,
keep that together, everything's fine.
yeah, and that's how a lot of Dodges are with the Cummins engines in them. The bodies just fall off of them, but the engines never go bad because they're actually really good engines. But if your body is completely falling apart, you might as well just take the powertrain out of it and put it in something else.
Yeah. So, kind of getting to the end of the episode and all that. Um, what do you think your end game is with vehicles, cars, particular career, particular vehicle you want to own, anything like that? What's your goal with vehicles?
Well, really, my goal is to have a classic car of some sort. It doesn't matter if it's a Ford or a Chevy, really doesn't matter to me. I've always wanted a classic car. I've always loved them since I was little, and they're just really hard to find, honestly. And if you do find them, they're really expensive. Like right now, I'm looking at a '68 Ford Thunderbird that I just found, and they want like $1,200 for it, and the body's rough, and
Yeah.
but the powertrain and everything is good, so it's worth the money. Honestly, that's super cheap for that car, but I don't exactly have that kind of money just to throw at something because you don't know what's going to happen with it.
Yeah,
But
the question is, do you buy just the thing set up and all that fully restored for 72,000, or do you buy four of them for 1,000 and just put all the parts together and do it yourself?
I'd rather do it myself, honestly, because then the car would have meaning to me because I put it together and it would be a special thing for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of the people that are doing this realize that, and I mean that definitely carries more weight to it than just the price tag.
Yeah, at a certain point, the price doesn't really matter anymore. It's just being able to have something that you've built with your own two hands that you can pass down throughout your family.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, that there's like a pride that comes with being the kid with, the muscle car or whatever. That's an older car. like there's a respect to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to touch on?
Well, I guess what I would really like to touch on is don't be car biased. I suffer from that myself. I am mostly a Ford guy, but I can see the good in other brands like Chevy and Ford, not Ford, God, and Dodge. I mean, and don't hate on something just because it's a different brand, because there are certain things about all cars that are good, and there are certain things that are bad. Some cars, the good outweighs the bad. Some the bad outweighs the good. It really depends on what the car is, but there's something good from every manufacturer, so you shouldn't really be biased.
There it is. There's your life advice for the week. Okay, everyone, that was Matthew Brookey. You can find him. Where can people find you, Matthew? Or can they?
On Snapchat.
Ooh, are you an enigma?
No.
Okay, if you want to shout that out now, you can. If not, I can just cut this
Yeah,
out.
sure. Add me at mbrookie2020.
Okay, for all your car advice and such like that, hit that man up. So, Matthew Brookey, everyone, I will see you next week on the Endgame Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.